Welcome to WorldScope Screencast. In today's episode, I'm going to demonstrate how to update your application based on widget events. This is typically used when you need to know about the state or context changes within a widget. For example, changing the context account or symbol or any click events. Let's use the classic case of changing the context account. On the page I have in front of you, I've got a simple example where we've got the account drop-down widget, and we want to know anytime a user has interacted with it and selected an account number, how the widget will fire an event, and what we want to do is hook a callback to listen for that event to handle it on your application so that you can process it, change something about your UI, or maybe update part of the page. And so I'm going to demonstrate, and we'll work backwards sort of from a working example, and then we'll dig into the code to sort of dissect how to do it. So in my example here, we're going to select an account. It's going to update the account nickname here and also update the account number that we have here. And over to the right, I built a little property viewer, and we're going to dump out all of the metadata that comes as part of the event. So for demonstration purposes, let's imagine that this property viewer is a piece of functionality or content that you host on your page. So that's going to represent what's listening to the callback and updating itself. So let's go ahead and run this example. I'm going to select account 2, and you see that we updated the DOM, and we printed out the nickname, we printed out the account number, and over here in the little property viewer code, printed out the actual account number, the index or position in the list of accounts. Right? So we have current account index. This is the actual index of the array, and here's the actual nickname. So these are all the properties that your callback would receive from the event. All right? Let's take a look at the code that's behind that. This is the HTML that produced the page I just showed you. Here's where we actually have the widget for the dropdown. In this little segment, I've got HTML H1 element. I've got a span for the nickname and a span element, or another small element for the account number. Right? So this is where we're writing our nickname to. This is where we're writing our account number to, and then we've got our property viewer table that I wrote with a bunch of placeholders for where we're going to write the account number and all of the properties that come out of the event. So this table and this H1, for demonstration purposes, imagine that this is content that's part of your page, and this is really your target of what you're trying to update based on an event fired by one of our widgets. So let's hop over to some JavaScript, and I'll show you the basic code and how simple it is to really catch that event and process it. The most important thing to have in your file, and this is also documented out on Digital Developer, is this block of code. This is analogous to an onReady event function callback. Just a little bit different because of the order of how things can load, the timing of the embedded widget library loading versus before you interact with it. So pretty much you're always going to have this block of code, right? And in it, in the first part of the condition, you're going to have a direct call to your function or your callback. In my simple example, I've got this init function, which we see down here. This is my main callback. And then in the else part of the condition, this is stock code, boilerplate. You're always going to have this. as well as a SVI widget init array that will sit globally out on the window object. The important thing is to push your callback onto it. So you want to have a direct function call to your callback, as well as pushing it onto the stack. I'll briefly explain the difference between the two, but just know that this is boilerplate code. You're always going to cut and paste this from our documentation right into your code and put your callbacks there. But the idea is simply the SVI investor ready. When our application, when our widget library has finished loading and is available to interact with, it will set that property. And so if this evaluates it true, it's just going to call your callback directly. And that's really a protection against you attempting to interact with the library and fire callbacks before the widget library has finished that loading. The majority of the time, the else part of this condition is going to run, and it just allows you to, which means the application is available, and it's going to start firing or calling any functions that have been pushed onto that array, one after another. So in this case, you're pushing your init onto the stack, and that will get called. So again, boilerplate code, put that first thing and hook your functions in. My simple example, this is the actual init callback, and what I've done is grab the handle to the SVI or the overall widget API. I'm calling the event dispatcher and registering this event on account context changed. And anytime a widget fires that event, any functions that I've bound to that will fire. And here is my actual event handler. Handle account change. Okay. So when we basically do this and change from one account to another, the widget fires this event. The event dispatcher listens for any of these events fired. It will look up in its registry all the callback functions that have registered for it, and it will call that function, which is, here's ours, passing along with that function call any of the data that the widget or the firing widget has produced. Again, we refer to that as the event data. So inside this function, and this is you can do anything you want here. This is your function at this point. So basically, you want to process the data. I'm just going through some basic evaluation of ensuring that it's an object and that it has the property that I'm looking for. So in this case, I want the nickname and I want the account number. And I'm doing something very basic. I'm grabbing my element by ID using a selector, the ID in the span, and I'm writing into that element the nickname, and I'm writing into that into the other element the account number. All right, so if we go back and run this again, if I select account 1, that function just wrote the nickname and the account number to those HTML elements. Very basic. When it's done with that, I have another event, right? When I showed you I wanted to process all the data and dump it out to this little property viewer that I built, I have another function, render account change event data, and I pass the entire data object. This is the function that does that. I do two things here. I dump everything to the console so we can actually see what the JSON object looks like, and then I go through and process the object, writing everything out to the HTML table. And that's basically what you see over here. Each time we call this function, change the dropdown, we have two event handlers ultimately bound to that event, and we write HTML to the DOM. If I open up the console, let's just clear it out so it's nice and obvious. Let's do account 1. So here's where I did the console logging. This is the actual JSON or the event data that your callbacks receive. You can see here's the account number, the current account offset, 0 is the first position in the array, as well as you get the actual index of the array and the nickname. So you can parse that JSON, use the data, and update your own application, your own widgets, your own content. My very basic example, I just want to receive the event and dump the content or context out to the screen. So there you have it. Some very simple mechanism to register callbacks to events, process the event data, and update your application. We have some other great tutorials that'll show you how to do sort of the exact opposite. You can fire events to update widgets based on events on your own application. So take a look at some of our other videos and some of our documentation. You'll find some great examples of how to do that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.